America is shaped by the movement of people from across the country and around the world, in our history and our future. From north, south, east, and west, artists and thinkers are bringing new perspectives to our stories of belonging, migration, and America's legacy. Through artwork and conversation, we can understand where we come from and what weaves us together, and envision what can become of us.
Funding for this program was provided by the Stanford Institute for Advancing Just Societies.
Tonight's program takes inspiration from Speak, Sing, Shout. We Too Sing America by Pakistani American artist Sada K. Khan. First, we will experience a performance by Khan, then a panel will explore how what we eat and where it's from shape our sense of identity. Multimedia maker Sada K. Khan's recent creations derive from Persian, Indian, and Arab manuscripts from Central India, Shiraz, and the Arab worlds. Via prints and porcelain, Khan creates an unbound world where forgotten femmes blossom amidst stylized flora and rich culinary knowledge traditions. She centers her cultural's multifold artistic practices to imagine and then inscribe dismissed narratives into a more inclusive global culture.
Good evening. Thank you, Ariana. And thank you, BRIC, Stanford, Zócalo, for creating a space where we can have a national conversation around what can become of us. Yes, Pakistani poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz has inspired me to speak. Langston Hughes, American poet, has motivated me to sing, and together they have very much inspired me to speak, sing, and shout. We too sing America. In fact, we are an integral part of the fabric of this country, so much so that the warp and the weft, the strength of that warp and weft is dependent on me, and of course I invite all of us to shine the cultural richness we embody. So yes, these two poems. What I'm gonna do this evening is share with you some morsels, the crux of what pushes me to counter what I think are faulty, lacking, incomplete archives. What you'll see appearing shortly are inherited archives that I'm going to comment on, and then I will focus more on reimagined archives and artworks that I've created to be outside of the archive and push those limits. So to my right here, we have New York botanical plant specimens extracted from global South soils. It includes black pepper, cinnamon, clove, frankincense, myrrh, nutmeg, orange blossom, and rose. For me, it is a rich archive. It is an archive that informs us, but at the same time, it is out of context and often out of life. To my left is another compendium, The People of India, created in the 1800s by the British Raj. And I often wonder, when I look at these two archives, I think of an imposition of gendering, classifying, and naming that is lacking again in cultural context and bestows little to no agency on these sentient beings, whether they be plants or people. When I look at the pages of The People of India, I ask the question, well, from whom did I descend? Am I descendants of marauders or jugglers or acrobats, or that morally depraved dancing girl? As some of you may know, I consider myself a South Asian fly girl. If you're interested in living color, then you know what I'm talking about. But both of these archives, getting back to some seriousness, both of these archives, yes, they have information, but that information is also anachronistic. It is literally yellowed. It has biases, and it's potentially harmful. So I often think, as I look at these systems that I think are imposed and random and thoughtless, did this way of thinking, did this mentality contribute to the 1930s and 1940s world wars, to a Holocaust, to multiple partitions? So much so, and it should start emerging as it is, you will see a NASA photo from space. This reveals the lit and militarized border between India and Pakistan. You can see this 240 miles from space. So did this 1947, these 1948 rushed and externally imposed borders, did these partitions reverberate in us to this day? They reverberate in me. Cutting up of the world traumatizes us all to this day. So to counter this, I try to build worlds and artworks that are beyond the confines of the archive. I try to create placeholders of histories denied, reimaginations of worlds muted. What you'll see now are 3 portals emerging. And these portals, the first 2 is an Islamic medieval map, Al-Idrisi, some of you may know it. It's a map from 1154, created for King Roger II of Sicily. And the second map that's about to emerge, you'll see also in the exhibit. It's an abstract map of the world from the Book of Roads and Kingdoms from the 9th century. You'll see peacocks, me reclaiming peacocks, that represent ancient stories that are associated with love and the monsoon. You'll see an amulet, an Arabic talisman that turns with the script. It's protection for me, it's protection for us, and it's protection for my works. You see a dhow, sailboats that are still sailed today in that African, Arab, Asian ocean world, propelled by the monsoon winds and the monsoon waves from East Africa to the Arab shores to West Africa and back again. Maybe these maps remind us that other worlds were and are possible before the Americas were significant or even people were interested in them or knew about them. Now I get to relax because I had to time that really well, so now I can okay, it's okay. I had to hit my marks. So now here to my right, we had a plant portal earlier, but now we have a different plant portal. These are representations again of black pepper, cinnamon, clove, frankincense, myrrh, orange blossom, rose, nutmeg. But these come from the New York Public Library. These are representations of plants from an Arab materia medica, and then this Persian book called The Wonders of Creatures and the Marvels of Creations. I love them. I think they're spectacular. They're nuanced, they're stylized, and they are decidedly not exact. In fact, they still impart much knowledge, much beauty to the trained eye. So, and we can take up the sound now. So what I wanted to do in this little area was rematriate these polyethnic names from the Indian Ocean languages. I wanted you to see the scripts, and I wanted you to hear the sounds, and I wanted you to hear 3 women, one from Afghanistan, one from Pakistan, one from Somalia, in Pashto, in Urdu, in Arabic, releasing these names from an imposed Latin naming system that cut them like a knife from their roots. I break them open so you can hear the hum of their names, their righteous names. This last portal, I call it the family portal. And please take a look at it, let the images wash over you. You'll see my family, you might see the likeness of my mother and my father, among others. But what you're not gonna see is, well, I've been searching for joy. A lot of us, I think in these last years, we've been searching for joy. And I've been searching for joy by going through family archives and films and footage. But what's not visible here, and when I talk about my family, I often talk about my ancestors and family as we have migrated much and we have been partitioned once. At the turn of the century, Muslims traveled from Kashmir to the Punjab. My father's family ended up in Amritsar and Simla, my mother's in Lahore and the environs. My father was a medical student in Amritsar at that time. He received the trains from Lahore filled with dead bodies. We don't see that in these images. He was told to get himself to Pakistan, and they ended up living in a house in Balla House in the old city of Lahore. That was formerly occupied by Hindus or Sikhs, and as they fled to India in 47, they probably had the keys to their houses in their hands. My mother was 15 years old at the time. She would peer over the wall at the fallen women, those women who had been raped and discarded and were in a type of no man's land. So these images don't necessarily show that, but it's also a place of great joy for me. And no, it's not perfectly timed, but you will have already seen my grandparents, a grandmother's funeral, cousins, aunts, school photos, degrees, graduations, footage of my mother via my father's gaze, bedecked proudly in her sari, strolling the streets of New York City, specifically the New York Times Square, which is near the New York Times. You see my mother in her first snow in Western Mass, and you see I hear my father saying, don't these Americans know that I grew up in the foothills of the Himalayas? I know snow. So what I hope you are feeling in these tender, loving images to me that I use to heal myself, to propel myself forward, I hope that gives you permission to do the same. It seems like the most radical thing you can do right now, outside of growing a garden and saving your seeds, is to be in community, is to greet each other, is to speak, sing, shout, who brought you to this place. So what I'd like to ask you to do right now, and what we can do is we can take up the volume, and you can be bathed in monsoon winds and rains and waves and sounds and beautiful women humming and saying a part of their culture and saying it with you. Who spoke, who sang, who shouted you into this world? Who do you want to bring into the room? Because that is what's going to strengthen our fabric. That is what's going to make the warp and the weft of these times stronger.
Thank you, Sarah. Everybody in this room, thanks you. Can Sarah tell us about the ceramic ornaments she is wearing?
Yes, yes. So these are patterns that you find in the Book of Delights, which is a Persian book of miniature paintings around food and culture and living. And there are many patterns in there. Some people call them Islamic patterns, but they existed before Islam too. So my shiros have two patterns associated with them, two colors. So I wanted to make those patterns and wear it as a type of kaftan, as a type of amuletic protective thing. And it has all the names of the plants in the many, many scripts of that African, Arab, Asian, ocean world. And I clank, which brings me joy.
Can you tell us which was one ingredient that stood out to you that was an inspiration for your work?
I usually get enraged about things, which propels me to work. So the Nutmeg's Curse by Amitav Ghosh and the history of nutmeg is quite profound and a perfect example of colonialism and extraction. And so that was very much a motivating factor. And it's the only one of those 8 pieces where there's some red, because the aril that's around the nutmeg is this gorgeous bright red like your sari.
I got a chance to look at your work in the gallery. Could you tell us a bit about the shiros and
Yes.
how you discovered them
Yes.
and created narratives for them? And does that dovetail at all with your family portal?
Yes. There is a 15th and 16th century cookbook, Book of Life, called the Book of Delights. And it is in the British Library. And I had to pay a lot of money to get those high-resolution TIFFs, and I was asking the question the entire time, what does the empire owe me? Obviously, I have to pay. And it has beautiful miniature paintings in them. And I asked a simple question, and I was discussing this earlier with our beautiful, amazing food panel, that if you are in that food world, you know about this manuscript. The Sultan is at the center, but it's this pluralistic, multi-ethnic world. And I was like, how come I don't know about this? And it's before the Portuguese colonized. So there's the pinkest and whitest person to the darkest, blackest person, a whole array. So I asked a very simple question. If I deleted the Sultan, what would their lives dream into? And this is one of those dreams.
Thank you again for your artwork and your wonderful performance. I am pleased to introduce our panel's moderator. Brian Lowery is the Walter Kenneth Kilpatrick Professor of Organizational Behavior at Stanford University and one of the founding faculty co-directors of the Stanford Institute for Advancing Just Societies. Lowery's research examines the ways others shape ourselves and how we shape theirs.
I am really pleased to have these three wonderful people with us tonight to have a conversation that explores migration and food. To my left is Power Malu. He's a pioneering artist and athlete and activist born and raised in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Power founded Artist Athletes Activists, a grassroots organization that advocates for the immigrant community, welcomes asylum seekers with dignity, and connects them with legal assistance, food access, and critical support services. Thank you for being here, Power. Joan Nathan is a frequent contributor to the New York Times and other publications. She has won the James Beard Award and the IACP and a Gourmand World Cookbook Award. She co-founded the 9th Avenue Food Festival in 1974, New York's oldest and longest running food festival. Thanks for being here, Joan. And Krishnendu Ray is a professor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Studies at NYU and the director of the doctoral program. He is the author or editor of several books, including The Migrant's Table, The Ethnic Restaurateur, and Curried Cultures. Thanks for being here, Krish. Power, my first question is for you. So I know that you spend a lot of time and energy welcoming new immigrants and refugees to the city. What role does food play in your process?
Well, food plays a major role in the work that we do because we're talking about people that have traveled numerous countries just to get here to New York City, and throughout their travels, a lot of them carry recipes with them but don't have the opportunity to have access to a kitchen to actually make that food. So when we greet them, the first thing they ask us is, are they able to cook food for their children if they have children, or are they able to cook a meal because they bought a recipe that they want to share with others? And so we try our best to connect them with either a kitchen in the community, or thankfully now our resource center has a kitchen where they're welcome to come and bring their recipes, and we'll go get the food, and then they can actually cook not only for themselves and their families, but for the people that come to our resource center to get services. So it serves as a community builder. And we're very proud to be able to share that with them because it helps with their mental health. A lot of them come here carrying a lot of trauma, and as we know, everything that's going on right now in today's society, they're very anxious and very worried. And so when we can provide that safe space for them, especially a kitchen where they can cook a meal and share and break bread with others, it's a safe haven for them. And so that's where they're able to actually communicate with people that might not even speak the same language, but they're able to share food.
Yeah, so, food is very grounding, right? It's a part of who we are. It's what we grew up with. It marks culture. So I'm really curious, especially in a place like New York where people are coming and going and many cultures exist, how do we think about identity in food, right? What are the boundaries of food identity in a place as cosmopolitan as New York?
Actually, I was thinking back to the 9th Avenue Festival. When you go into somebody's house, it's a sacred place. And a kitchen is even more sacred place. And I think that food is food is family, it's what you are. And for the people that you have, it's been taken away. And all those rooms have been taken away. So it's just so incredibly important, and it makes you feel good. It makes them feel good. And when you're cooking, it makes you feel even better if you're cooking for other people. So I think it's essential. And that's why I loved watching what Sarah was doing, because I realized that spices, for some people, are holy. It's home. This is what you grew up with, and they're not the same for everybody. So that I'm sure you've got a lot of different ideas in your kitchens. And especially when immigrants are sharing. I know I was with my daughter, who's here tonight, in Germany, where there was in Munich, where there were all kinds of different people, immigrants, sharing a kitchen, and all different spices. So they didn't necessarily want to all eat together because they wanted to eat their food.
I'm going to add a pessimistic twist to that. They're both doing terrific work, and you heard Power's work, and I've been talking to him. The other side of it also is the central question of identity is in some ways also ethnocentric. A good example, Sarah and I come from a culinary culture, northern India and Pakistan. It's indistinguishable in some ways, but don't tell it to the Indians, don't tell it to the Pakistanis, right? So there's a sense of this excessive investment in ethnocentric idea. And of course, I've spent first half of my life in India, and I go back, my family's there, in some ways food is inclusive, can be inclusive, can create community, but food, especially in South Asia, is highly divisive, okay, and related to caste hierarchies. So in some ways, there's almost probably nothing social, even beautiful thing like food, that cannot be turned into a weapon by the wrong people. That's my lesson around me right now.
So I'm going to stay with your pessimism. I'm going to try to give it a little twist maybe. So when you migrate, you go somewhere else. So what you're talking about is maintaining boundaries. You're looking at your neighbor, you're different from us. And also, Joan, you kind of alluded to this because you might not want to eat with people who have different spices.
Right.
But when you migrate, what you often are looking for people who share something with you, right? And you're looking to maintain a sense of where you're from. So how do you think about that? Is that ethnocentric? Do you worry about that? Maintenance of who you are, who you've been, your community, your history?
I can kind of start on that. My first book, The Migrant's Table, in fact, looks at 126 households, And if you look at their breakfast, these are Indian immigrants, okay? They are completely Americanized. Okay, so if you just look at breakfast, you'll say, wow, these people have become American very quickly. That is partly driven by commutes, labor force participation rates of women, etc., and lack of domestic workers. But if you looked at dinner, okay, it is more, amongst my sample, the dinner was more Bengali than Bengalis in Kolkata. Okay, so there is a sense I see that's why immigrants as quintessentially modern subjects, where we are dealing with questions of continuity and questions of discontinuity. And all of us face that in the modern world. And immigrants, in some ways, show us how to do some of this, where you can become, like your language, be substantially Americanized, and yet on the other side, retain elements of your cultural domain, like the example of the dinner. So you can do both.
Well, and I think it's not just cultural, it's also religious. And you can think of it as divisiveness, but I also think you can, I think about, I've written lots of Jewish cookbooks, that for some people, it's comfort, it's what they believe in. It's not trying to be divisive with other people, it's maintaining their culture. And I think that's something that's also important for us to think about when we're thinking about dietary laws and whatever we're discussing today.
Being born and raised in the Lower East Side, I'm a New Yorican, and I experienced a lot of people that migrated from Puerto Rico to New York City, and the thing that brings community together is food. That is our identity. That is something that can't be taken away, and we carry that with pride. For example, a food like pasteles is something that is usually during the holidays because it takes a lot of time to make, but it brings the family together to actually do the different processes that take to make a pastel, right? To make pasteles, to make arroz con gandule. And so there's a couple of restaurants in my neighborhood in the Lower East Side, one particular one that is traditional Puerto Rican cuisine that was born out of people migrating to New York City and then just starting a little cart where they would bring food, traditional Puerto Rican food, to the neighborhood, and people would purchase food from them because it brought them back home. That was what they were missing. And so food plays a big role in creating community and having people feel like they're home even though they're far away from home. So I'm talking about Adela's. So if you get a chance, you go to the Lower East Side and you visit Casa de Adela, and that is Puerto Rican cuisine, top notch, and it's home cooked, old school, small space where you go there and you feel like you're in your grandma's house, grandma's kitchen, you know, and is very family vibe. And so that's what food does for a lot of people. When they're missing home, they actually go to those places where they can actually smell the sofrito and hear the singing and the music and the loud chatter, and it just brings them back. So that's my connection as a Puerto Rican. I just wanted to throw that in there so that people can see like why we gravitate towards these kinds of communities when they celebrate food, because we don't want to lose our identity, because a lot of times we've been forced to forget our language or been forced to forget customs just so we can assimilate and feel like we can belong. And it's about us celebrating who we are and not losing that.
Yeah. And also foodways, it seems to me, are one of the last things to go. And as you said, they're going to, I think all over the world they eat cereal, even in India and Pakistan. But what you're saying is, I have this idea called culinary lag. And maybe it isn't so with the Puerto Rican community yet, but in writing cookbooks or going around the country, I've seen that other traditions that maybe once were really popular are gone, except for immigrants at holidays. For example, lutefisk, which is a Norwegian dried fish cured in lye, that was Norwegian immigrants used to have, or still do have, at Christmas in Minneapolis. When I spoke to a Norwegian ambassador to the United States and told him about this, he just laughed at me. He said, nobody does that anymore in Norway. And it's the same thing with, I'm sure most of you have seen the Big Night with this pizza rustica, also called a tempal, which is huge, very fattening Easter main course, like a pie, in Italy. They don't make it in Italy anymore, but Americans from Italy make it, which is probably what's going to happen with some of those Puerto Rican dishes eventually. But it's no longer, they don't do it in Italy. It's too fattening.
We hope not. That's and I don't think so, because there's always a place that you're going to find Puerto Rican food somewhere. There's Puerto Ricans everywhere.
But you know what's interesting? I want to pick up on something you said. You said I'm a New Yorican. You didn't say I'm a Puerto Rican. And I just wonder, how do we think about the evolution of identities, the evolution of food? When we think about tradition, we think about it being static, but food is not static. And what does that say about identities? When do things change, and how do they change? I'm curious what you all think about that.
I was thinking, what did you call it? A culinary lag? Yeah. That's a very cool way. It's a bit of an archaeology. of knowledge about a place. And it also, you see the reverse side of it. In a way, if you have read V.S. Naipaul's work, who is of Indian heritage out of the Caribbean, he goes back to India and he's really disappointed that Indians do not use lamps with lamp oil. They use electric lights now. And so that's always kind of a bit of the diasporic sensibility, okay, to stymie change, excessive change, because they are surrounded by difference. Compared to, say, in India, well, there's 1.5 billion people who are Indians. So in India, I never said I'm from India. It is meaningless, right? And so my culture, in some ways, so what one sees is a sense of the temporality and its spatiality. When in a particular place, in a different place, the rate of change in some things speeds up, and the rate of change in some things slow down in some ways. And I see that in different meals. I'll give you one last example in terms of, you would think in a wedding reception, because it's a life cycle ritual, food would be most conservative. But if you go to most Indian wedding rituals, they are like this pastiche of food from all parts of India. Okay? No, there's no regional cuisine that is specific to it. So sometimes in a regular weekday dinner, you can see the impulse of conservation. And sometimes in the moment like a wedding feast, you see the concept of improvisation and collation in new context, and creating in some ways national cuisine only in exile. Because in fact, national cuisine does not exist in the nation. It only exists in exile.
That's an interesting point. I also think about authenticity, right? So that's kind of built into what you're saying. Like you say, a national cuisine is like, is it authentically Indian? Is it authentically Puerto Rican? This is something you talked about too. What defines authenticity? And I think about this makes me think about Sarah's work a bit. For example, are chilies authentic in Thai food? Are tomatoes authentic in Italian food? Because those things did not exist in the old world prior to people arriving in the Americas, right? Those are things that are indigenous to the New World. So are those things authentic or not? Like, how do you think about authenticity?
Well, it's really hard. I mean, if you just take fat, okay, fat that's used in pies or cakes. We use butter. We use vegetable oil, which people didn't have. What did they use tallow. They use lard. Most of us wouldn't even think of using those because we have Crisco. So that I think that authenticity, I don't know where you really get real authenticity. Or just take matzo balls, for example. I hope some of you have tasted matzo ball. But anyway, you get matzo ball mix. And people think that's authentic. Well, it isn't, so that all of these things change with the way the world changes, the way that we saw the three things on the map: ingredients, people, and the world. As we travel, we learn new things. So it's really hard to find out what's a really authentic dish.
I think academics in some, sorry. No, you go for it.
Well, I'm an Afro-Boricua, I'm a New Yorican, and I'm learning a little bit more about Puerto Rico since Hurricane Maria relief work. So I consider myself a Boricua. And then when we're talking about the food and the authenticity, when things start becoming mass-produced, they lose their authenticity because then you got people creating things that they probably don't even know much about, but they add ingredients that don't go with it, and then they hijack foods and things like that. So the authenticity stays true within community and within small rooms.
So I think authenticity, if you look at it, academics don't like to use that word, but I think we're overly skeptical about the fact that it is the quest for a true copy. And if you think about the paradox in that, right, it's a true copy. Whenever we are seeing something, we are seeking something authentic, we are seeking a true copy of something, okay? And what people are questing there is two things, basically, which is related to the experience. One is accuracy. The other is sincerity. Okay? And in some ways, hence, authenticity is the quest for accuracy and sincerity in the context of your life experience. Okay? But in some ways, there is no way to objectively define it other than, in fact, subjectively and intersubjectively constitute it, where in some ways, if you tell my Indian friends, no chilies from now, okay, they'll freak out, because that's, in some ways we define it. Even some restaurants consider themselves, the more chili you have, the more authentic it is, okay? And which is basically a 19th, 20th century phenomena. So your question, very well put. I don't think we have an answer to that, but what we have an answer to is the quest in the context of change and modernization is to seek the accurate and the sincere, and that's what it is a quest for.
Let me push a little bit on that. I think you can think of food and scale, and it's an interesting conversation. So what I mean by scale is there's the personal, like what you ate at home, like what your mom cooked, what your dad cooked. That's personal to you, and you feel like that is authentic. When I smell that, or think, it reminds me of who I am. Then there's communal, right? We talk about Puerto Rican, like there's a communal sense of like, this is what we are in this community, this local community, whatever that community is. My image of what it was back there if I haven't been. And there's historical, right? And this is what we're talking about a little bit when we talk about Sarah's work, because there's a historic sense of where did this come from. So when you talk about accuracy and authenticity, at what level are you talking about it? Yeah. Is it personal? Is it communal? Is it historical?
All three levels are a good way to think about it. Personal. And I think I'll give you one example. I don't know about you. I try to make everything my mother makes, and I always fail to make it. Like that. So I don't know how authenticity is being communicated between my mother's generation and mine. Is partly what is driving it is that quest in me, that I want to make that, and I can never do it for some reason. And that may be a psychological positioning where I'm an older man now, and I'm questing for what it felt like to eat my mother's food when I was 10 years old. And that can never be replicated. So in that context, what I'm looking for is sincerity of effort.
So if you try hard enough, even if you fail, it's okay.
I don't know. It's like I failed 90% of the time. My mother says, I don't know what NYU is doing, pay you money to talk about food, and you can't even cook the 6 dishes I cook so well.
But you've also, since you've been a child, experienced so much other food, so that it is, I think the authenticity is your idea of something that your tastes have changed too. Because I tried making my mother's dish for, I have a new grandchild. I thought I would make it for when we had a baby naming. And I hadn't made it in a long time. It was from one of my first cookbooks, and it just didn't taste very good. And I thought, what? You know, but what I remember from my childhood, maybe you do too, and you do too, is watching my mother making it. And the experience of smelling it and cooking it and then tasting it, it was so delicious. Well, one of the recipes had cocoa in it, and I clearly we didn't use very good cocoa back then, and it wasn't good. So I think we changed too.
I think when I look at the people coming to the kitchen and cooking food and how they communicate, I think that the authenticity is personal, and they're so passionate about sharing. For example, we had a woman from Guinea that was making a peanut butter stew, and next to her was a Venezuelan making arepas, and they were kind of like looking at each other, because I've also never seen, peanut butter stew with chicken, and she was making it and just kind of the way she was talking about it and sharing with other people from Africa that were there. I think between them, they had like a little competition. And I always see that also with jollof rice, when they're kind of like, oh no, this, my place does it better than you. And there's like this friendly competition. So I think the authenticity comes from that. But it's interesting when you have someone actually making food and they make it with so much love, and they take their time making it, and they're so proud to share it with someone. I think that's what makes it authentic, because because it comes from a place of love, and they're inspired to make this, to share where they come from and share a piece of home with you.
And, this is all makes me think about consumption too, right? So you're talking about people have different styles of jollof rice, or you can't reproduce this matzo ball or the whatever you were trying to make from your...
Don't challenge her on that.
I'm sure they're delicious. Okay. But again, and I'll just go back to a place like New York or any kind of cosmopolitan place, we're eating all kinds of food all the time. And so what is the consequence of, and you've already pointed to this a little bit, what do you think is the consequence of the amount of consumption of the varied kind of foods that we have? Right? How does that change? How does that change your experience of eating Puerto Rico? Like, you eat Puerto Rican food, but if you were in Puerto Rico and never left, would the experience of Puerto Rican food be the same for you? And I'd argue, I think that maybe it wouldn't be, right? So I just wonder what you think is the consequence of the fact that we have access to such diversity. And again, you were also pointing to this too.
Yeah, so in some ways, I would say it makes me a bit of an inverted anthropologist. So in some ways, where I begin to see India better because I left it, and most of the food world on an everyday basis is a habituated world. Okay, what Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, calls habitus, which is habits socialized. So we are not making constant decisions, self-conscious decisions about it, habitual. So it allows me to look back with a kind of an interest and insight that I did not have when I was in India. Okay, that's why in some ways I think my work on food could only happen because I left India.
There's another thing that I'll point to that's a part of the academic literature, where it looks like as people attain more power and status, they become more omnivorous, right? They consume more varied types of things. And this is not just food, but in music and other things. So with the people who are groups that tend to be lower status or newer to the community stay with a limited set of things. And then people who are higher status, have more power, tend to be more omnivorous in their consumption. Like, what does that tell us? What do we learn from that distinction?
Well, I would agree with you on that one. And I don't live here. I live in that other city called Washington, D.C., that some of you may have avoided right now. But anyway, I hope. But I've seen people that, let's say you have a Philippine person working for you who does your cooking, and you make her or him make American food, what you want. And I once had pancit, which I love. It's a Philippine rice dish, and with shrimp and other things in it. And I said to this woman, the Philippine cook, "Do you ever make pancit, which is delicious?" And she said, "No, they don't want Philippine food." And I think that's what's happening a lot. That the food that people really want, they're sort of afraid to show, and you would know this better than I do, to other people, this really good ethnic food that keeps them together. Because so many people have lost it. And also, in a city like New York, you can get everything, right? There are all kinds of and food writers are constantly trying to find these good ethnic restaurants to find maybe that real authentic food. And it's hard to find.
Well, I could say that it's not healthy for you, but cuchifritos, right? That used to be in our communities. There's maybe a couple still around, but that kind of food would be considered food for poor people, right? And not so good for you. But it's like, that's kind of something that we look forward to. It's like, for us, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to the cuchifrito. Like people go, oh, we're going to go to McDonald's. That used to be our spot, right? And another thing that I could think about is that my grandmother and my aunts used to all go to the fish market, La Marqueta, on Essex Street, and they used to go into the garbage and grab the heads of the fish that used to be discarded because that's for the poor people. But they used to make the most delicious soup, the fish soup, and it's so good for you that when the people caught on to what they were doing, they started selling that to the people. So it's kind of interesting how we actually gravitate towards things that are good for us and healthy for us, and when it gets found out, then it gets sold back to us, whatever. But yeah, just wanted to give that little example.
No, in fact, yesterday I bought from Wegmans just fish heads and trims for $4. That's not that much money for Wegmans. It's not the whole paycheck, but it's an equivalent one. But I made it with some poppy seed and mustard oil and chilies and just steamed. And I think what your question points to is this thing: what happens when what belongs to the commons becomes a commodity? And so when something becomes a commodity, that means what? You'll have to buy it. Okay? So it's always a transactional relationship. And I think it links back to your previous question about authenticity. What people are often seeking in an authentic transaction is something from the commons that is not fully commodified, but they want to buy it. There's a paradox in there. So I think in some ways, that's the downside of commodifying everything. And very clearly, as you said, the research on music and food shows that Americans, at least since about the 1980s, have become massively omnivorous, first in music and then in food. Food is a little later than that. And that is exactly which also accentuates the search for the authentic. So you want to buy it, but you don't want it to be bought so easily by anyone else. That's the real authentic thing. That's why the hole in the wall, that's why obscurity, that's why the secretiveness around it. And of course, the other side of it is all these ethnic restaurateurs are very smart. Okay? So they will hide their authenticity and not have the menu in English because it'll pull in suckers like me saying, I want that menu that is not in English, and they're selling it to everyone. Okay? So that's the funny relationship between the commons and the commodity form, and how prestige and status works when you can buy things.
And how does this tie into appropriation? So what you just described is a situation where somebody is trying to create a sense of authenticity, and there's also a desire sometimes, goes to the point you were making, Power, I believe, where you want to say this was ours, and now it's being taken by others. It's being taken from us, and maybe in the worst case, sold back to us after it's been taken from us.
And cleaned up,
yes,
as they say. The worst words you can use. Upscaled and cleaned up.
So how do we think about what's the difference between sharing, right? So you're excited and proud of what you have and what your community's produced and how delicious it is. Sharing it, and appropriation, where it's just an open commodity for anyone to participate in.
Well, I think we can go back to hummus, because that's one of the key foods that people say there's been appropriation. It's been around for like 5,000 years. Everybody in the Middle East would eat hummus in a form, maybe not with sesame because it wasn't brought back, but it was the poor man's protein.
I think that's why we are called humans, right? From dust to dust.
Hummus.
I think it is. Someone has to check the etymology, hummus and humans.
Anyway, it seems to me it's sharing. These things have been around. The rice dishes are things that all these people use, right? I just don't get it.
So when when you say you don't get it, you mean the idea of appropriation is not one that makes sense to you?
It's sharing. Nobody owns anything, really, especially when it comes to food. That's my opinion.
That's a controversial one.
What? It's very controversial.
Power, you jump in and tell us. Give us the solution to this thing, man.
No, it's true. It is about sharing, right? And that's the important thing about being human beings and not allowing ourselves to be divided, right? It's about sharing. But when you turn appropriation and exploitation, that becomes a problem. But when it's about sincere sharing and really just kind of like connecting on a human level and using food for that purpose, I think that is what we should be doing. But when they try to take or hijack something and then sell it back to you, that's a problem, and that should be called out.
See, he said sincerity. And I think that's absolutely crucial about it. And it is the tragedy of what belongs to the commons and turned into a commodity form. Hence, we are questing for that sincerity. And if that sincerity is possible, then I think all this belongs and can be shared and should be shared. And it is the blame happens when it is ricochets back and returns as a commodity, now highly valued. Now you can charge $40 instead of charging $5. That's where the resentment comes from.
I think that food is about identity maintenance for a lot of people, and that requires boundary maintenance. And if you remove boundaries, you've obliterated my identity, and I'm not okay with that. So sharing is fine as long as you know it's mine. You know what I mean? Like, I think that, so I just want to be clear, when we say sharing, that is not the same as saying, like, this is all of ours. It's like, this is mine, and I'm sharing with you. And the reason I think that people might feel this way, and I'd love to hear what you all think and challenge me, is because food tells us who we are. And to know who we are, and I'm going to tie this to Sarah, is to make boundaries and name things, right? That's how we know where we are and who we are. And if you obliterate those boundaries and you say everything is everyone's, how do I know who I am?
We're not saying that. We're not saying that. What you're saying is that I like sweet potatoes, for example. Okay, I like sweet potatoes. But this is me. Nobody else can have it. It doesn't make sense.
Oh, you can have it as long
Or a
as it's
recipe.
mine.
There might be.
Oh, you can use my recipe too, as long as you know it's mine.
Is a question partly of intellectual property and cultural property in a world in which it belongs to the commons. So you're pointing absolutely a right kind of a crisis of where to work with those boundaries and what is the nature of the transaction across the boundary. You know, and I think it usually serves me better if it is not a commodified relationship, so it feels a shared world. And genuinely, people are, and one example is Asian Americans have a very strong feeling about, they have been demonized in the, say, school cafeteria for eating smelly food. And now Asian food is all a rage and comes back in some ways. So you can see that second generation often, I see that. It is not the immigrant generation, in fact. It is the second generation who goes to American school, have this real sense of resentment of what used to be condemned, dismissed, demonized, has now become sexy, and now everyone wants to be part of this. And every white guy now has to tell me how to use a chopstick to eat sushi. Okay, so that is this kind of a question of resentment that is born out of social interaction that is kind of some of it burdened with this question of boundaries.
Could you speak on the impact of food deserts on culture and community?
We can talk about the pandemic. In the Lower East Side, where I'm from, we had a situation where a lot of the food that was being brought to our community wasn't culturally sensitive. There was no access to produce so that people can make their sofrito. There wasn't access to the foods that we're used to having in our community. So, which is part of why I actually started a community fridge program in my neighborhood and inside public schools to give people access to fresh produce. But just thinking about how these new supermarkets or these mega marts pop up in our communities and they are not accessible to people that are from that neighborhood. So it's kind of like less about food deserts and more about food apartheid. There are food deserts in the Bronx and in a lot of other places, but the problem is that when you put these mega marts in our communities and our people don't have access to them, then it becomes an issue of discrimination, or it becomes an issue of scarcity in that sense. So we made it our job or our purpose to actually connect with farmers and be able to get this fresh produce to our families, especially seniors who were used to cooking a certain way, and they were being bought like canned food or like things that they can't really utilize. So there was a lot of food waste. So I think it plays a huge role when it comes to culturally sensitive foods, to actually keep in mind that when you're trying to help people, ask them questions and ask them what do they need and be informed before trying to come in as a savior and just dump things on them.
It's a similar thing in Washington. There's an area called Anacostia that's across the river. And I work with a group there. And I learned that the local supermarket chain, there's only one supermarket in that whole area. And they come once every 2 weeks so that people can't get local produce because they just don't want to. They don't want to go there. And the company, it's a major national company, won't go there. And so this organization that I know, called Martha's Table, has these joyful markets where they bring fresh produce to schools and people can pick them up. But if they couldn't do that, there'd be nothing.
I think what's interesting about this and all the comments you all are making is how powerful food is in both allowing us to connect with people, but in also drawing lines. And there's a paradox in there that I think is really interesting. All right, well, it's time to close. Thank you for all the participation, and thank you to the incredible conversation you all had. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Funding for this program was provided by the Stanford Institute for Advancing Just Societies.